Hey everybody, welcome back to Cheap Brew. I'm Anthony, and today we're going to be putting together a very cheap-ish beer. I have never made beer before, but I've been studying a lot of YouTube videos lately, and all I got was water, barley, hops, and yeast. I only bought those ingredients. I didn't buy a kit. I thought that was way too mainstream. If I'm going to screw this up, I'm going to screw it up on my own terms. So I went ahead and bought American Crystal 40 grain. I just crushed this up a little bit because I went with malt extract here, dry malt, but this smells really good, so we're going to use this as our grain. As far as hops go, Cascade hops, because I live over in Seattle, and of course we have the Cascade range. And this is 2 ounces. This is an enormous package for 2 ounces, and I've never smelled a hop before, but hops are so potent. For the malt extract, i.e. the sugar in this, I got dried malt extract from wheat. The other one I got was a Pilsen Light, which is generally, I believe, a grain that's used in light beer. All my stuff's been sanitized, so let's just jump right into this. So our first step is going to be to steep our grain in water that is roughly, ideally less than 168, 170 degrees. The reason why we're doing that is to get the flavor and the sugar out of this grain and a little bit of the color. So in one part of the pot, we actually hit 168 degrees. So I took it off the heat for just a second, hoping to give the burner a chance to cool down a little bit before I move it back on. I've got it on low heat at the moment, and about 14 minutes to go. Somebody's got their panic alarm going on outside. Hopefully nobody broke into their car. Anyways, while we listen to the wonderful chime of a 2010 Chevy Silverado in the background, let's talk about what the next step is. While we're waiting for the grain to finish steeping, we're going to get about a quart of water. At least that's what I'm going to start with for our step after steeping the grains, which is rinsing the grains to get any residuals, sugar that we didn't get out in the pot. Another thing I'd like to add is that instead of the small pot, I'm going to be using a bigger, how many quarts? The label's not facing out, so I don't know. I'm going to be using a bigger pot to rinse the grain in. I'm actually going to be transferring everything over to that pot because that's going to be my boil pot. So now that we've got everything in our boil pot, we're going to add the malt extract, which is basically like the sugar that the yeast are going to ferment. So it's possible that some of you have been counting how many quarts are in here. It's a 1 gallon batch. Well, for you quart counters, I'm not sure exactly how much is going to boil off, but I know I am going to boil off a little bit. We're at 5 quarts of water, and I'll have a little bit less than 4 quarts go into my fermentation vessel. While we're waiting for that to start boiling, we're going to start measuring out some hops. I'm probably only going to use half the bag, maybe less, because those hops are so very strong. I'm not sure if it's like that for all hops out there, but those hops are very strong. So I'm going to take what I consider to be about a half a cup or so. We'll call that good. I'm not sure if that's a lot or not. That's maybe half a cup, 3/4 cup. We'll just stick it in this bag here, and then we'll throw that in the pot when it starts to boil. Alright, our pot has started boiling. I've suddenly decided against the muslin bag. I think I'm just going to go ahead and throw these suckers in here. So we have about 20 minutes left to go in our boil, and there's a few things that I'm noticing. First, there's a lot of condensation in here, which I kind of expected, so I've been wiping that down with a rag. Second, my wife is not a huge fan of the way that this smells. Chow mein noodle water was one of the ways that she described it. I don't think it's that bad. It's at least spaghetti water. In about 4 minutes, we're gonna add the next round of hops to it. Our 15-minute hop addition is gonna be almost a full cup of the Cascade hops. We'll let that boil for another 15 minutes, and then we will immediately throw this into an awesome ice bath. So let's talk about this ice bath that we're gonna prepare. I'm gonna start getting it ready now. Oh my God, again. Now that the car alarm issue has been taken care of, I'll explain the ice bath and how I made it. Over the course of the day, I filled up this Ziploc bag with 4 trays of ice that I made. Threw it in the sink with some water and a little bit of salt. We're gonna let the wort chill in the ice bath for however long it takes to get to about 75 degrees. We just wanna cool it down. So it's been about 20-ish minutes and our wort temperature is 75 degrees roundabout. It's lower than 80 degrees. So I think my next step is to filter out all those hops using either this strainer or the muslin bag. I got the strainer led through one of the handles here, and I'm gonna see if that works because it sits just underneath. I think it actually might. And now we're just a little bit shy on wort. I'm just gonna squish these guys because they absorbed a lot of water. So there was a lot of water lost in that boil off. Alright, I'm gonna say that we're done. Before I do the gravity reading, I would like to point out the color of this is a very light kind of amber color, and I'm really curious to see if it will maintain that color. It smells very hoppy. I'm gonna call that 1.035, which is about 5%. So not a very high gravity beer, but it is a beer nonetheless. Before we add our yeast, let's shake it up a little bit and give it a little oxygen. This naturally is a very important part because we want to put oxygen into this liquid so that the yeast will have something so that they can do, if I remember from the course, what is it, like glycolysis? Some big fancy name for some process that's basically just when yeast use oxygen to create ethyl alcohol. I think that's enough shaking. Let's add the yeast. This is the yeast we're using today. This is Berlin Premium Beer yeast. It's a lager yeast, and there is a lot of it in here. This whole thing is filled. I'm only going to use a little bit of this since I'm only doing a 1-gallon batch. Hopefully they don't have too much fun and send bubbles fermenting out the top of this guy. After 3.5 hours of work, we're finally done with making the wort. It's in its fermentation jug, and the lager yeast are starting to settle to the bottom. It's time for me to go to bed as well. It's 12:20 at night. On another note, we're gonna let it sit for about 14 days in the closet and keep it as dark and cool as possible. Lager yeast like to be 50 to 60 degrees when they ferment, so we're gonna leave it out there for the duration of its fermentation. It's now day 4 of our beer fermentation. Day 2 got a little messy, but I constructed a clutch blow-off tube using a little bit of hose that I cut off my auto siphon. I left that on there for a day, and now it seems to have settled out. Day 4 is significantly slower in fermentation. Another thing I should mention is that on the morning of the first day, I had to pull the jug out of my closet and move it inside because some ants had started crawling all over the bottle. Now that it's inside, that problem has been resolved. To make up for the darkness, I've wrapped the beer in this cleverly cut Target bag. You can do this at home. It's now day 15 of fermentation, and speaking of fermentation, there's not a lot of it going on in the jug. There's an occasional bubble here or there, but nothing measurable, no movement in the airlock. So I think it's time to bottle our beer and carbonate it with some sugar. That's also called priming. So for starters, I've gone ahead and sanitized 5 22-ounce bottles and 1 12-ounce bottles and 6 bottle caps. I'm not going to fill all those probably, but I wanted to have more than what I thought I was going to need. So what I'm going to do is take this fancy bowl and stick it on the scale. I'm going to take my corn sugar and pour it in until this says about 0.8 ounces. We're going to take the corn sugar and put it in a pot with about a half cup of water. We're going to boil that and then add it to our beer. And then the yeast are going to go to town eating that and create carbon dioxide, which is going to bottle condition our beer. Now that we've racked our beer out of the fermenter into our bottling jug, it's time to finally put this beer into a bottle. Before we move on, I'd like to point out that the yeast that are in this jar are actually very alive and reusable. Let's take a final gravity reading of the beer before we actually put it in the bottle. It looks like we fermented down to 1.019, not a very high content beer, but this will work as a first attempt. We've played around long enough. Let's bottle this stuff. Now the moment I've been waiting for just over 2 weeks, it's time to put caps on these things and let them condition in the bottle for a little while. Well, thanks for watching, everybody. Here you go. Have a beer. Just kidding. Not ready yet. These two still have to go and carbonate, as I said earlier, so that's going to be another 14 to 28 days. I managed to fill all 5 of these 22-ounce bottles and part of a 12-ounce bottle. This is not going to carbonate very well. Look at all that open space. It's just not going to build up enough pressure. So I'll be curious to see what happens to it. But the other 5 of these bottles are going to be a great time, kind of. I guess I should remember that this is a very low alcohol content beer. In about 14 to 28 days, we're going to crack one of these bad boys open so you can see the color, and we'll actually see if it tastes any good. But for now, I just have a lot of cleaning to do. Well, it's been 15 days, and today is the day I've been waiting for I think it's been almost a month now. Finally get to try the beer. So let's dive right into that thing. Are you as excited as I am? I had low hopes. Now I have high hopes. Let's see what it tastes like. Oh, that's actually not that bad. It's not quite as hoppy as I expected it to be. Very grainy, but not harsh. Surprisingly, I figured with the blowout that would have been like a dead giveaway. That was just going to be terrible, but it's actually not bad. Look at this color. It's gorgeous. Pretty close to what I was going for, actually, but a little more hop next time would be good. It's good enough to drink. That's all that matters. In a way, it's almost kind of stouty. I think it was just that one grain type that I used. I should have used a lighter grain mixed in. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this little 15-minute video about my first attempt at beer. It worked out pretty well, so you could try this at home as well. That's all I gotta say. I'm gonna go drink more beer, so have a wonderful day.